Welcome to Maximising Your Happiness Potential, a webinar for Mental Health Awareness Week 2020. And this year's theme is kindness. And within Maximising Your Happiness Potential, we're going to be looking at how you can build your kindness to yourself and the things that you can do to make yourself happy. And I'm delighted to be with you here today. My name's Layla Okai. I'm the CEO of Diverse Minds. And my previous role before running my own business was as head of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Centre at Imperial. I have extremely fond memories of Imperial, so I'm delighted to be back and presenting this webinar to you. So I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see the presentation. And here we are. Maximising happiness potential. And it's been an extremely difficult time, as we all know, and we've had to make adjustments and adapt really quickly. So I hope you find this webinar useful. So what we're going to look at what does happiness really mean in today's world, to explore the principles of positive psychology, to discover what your happiness potential is, and you're going to come up with actions to maximize your happiness potential. So what is happiness? There are lots of different words that I have found in a thesaurus, ranging from contentment, gaiety, joy, joyfulness, glee, blitheness, carefreeness, lightheartedness, good cheer, well-being, enjoyment, exhilaration, elation, ecstasy, jubilation, blissfulness, and euphoria. And happiness will mean different things to different people. But essentially, how could happiness be defined? Well, it's about having your basic needs met: shelter, housing, clothing, as is known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, social well-being, and feeling that life is worthwhile with a purpose, so that you're contributing to something bigger and worthwhile, and also realizing that we can't be happy and exhilarated and full of jubilation all the time, but how we manage our levels of anxiety and have those tools to support ourselves. And each year, the Office of National Statistics runs a survey, and they ask the following questions. They usually ask this in March of a given year. I don't know whether that's happened this year, and the reports come out in October of the same year. And the questions they ask are: how satisfied are you with your life nowadays? How happy did you feel yesterday? How anxious did you feel yesterday? And to what extent do you feel the things you do in your life are worthwhile? Now, of course, asking how happy did you feel yesterday and how anxious did you feel yesterday is a snapshot in time. Because, for example, if someone had experienced a car accident, but they came out unscathed, it's still likely that their anxiety levels are going to be higher. So in essence, this is a dipstick check. And here is an example of the current happiness picture in the UK. And what you can see here is the figure I've taken from the ONS, their annual population survey. And this is ranging from the years ending March 2012 to March 2019. And it looks at the mean average rating out of 10. And in the year ending March 2019, there was little change in personal wellbeing measures in the UK. So this isn't on the graph, but this is just separate to give you a bit of context. Apart from a slight improvement in average happiness ratings, which increased from 7.52 to 7.56 out of 10. And looking here, what we can see is that there was an 11.9% increase in anxiety ratings for Northern Ireland, from 2.53 to 2.83 out of 10 between the years ending March 2018 and 2019. And if you want to know more, I've included the link so you can go and have a look. The other thing the ONS do is to kind of keep a barometer, if you like, and looking at change over the 5 years. So they have a 5-year dashboard, and you can also access that on the link. And it's to look at what's been happening, what are the changes. So overall, when this was done, March 2019, there was a positive picture of life in the UK, with a majority of indicators either improving or staying the same over the long term. As you can see from the bar chart, 26 areas improved, 9 areas there was no overall change. Areas of our life that had improved according to this survey were personal well-being, perhaps because we're talking about it more, our life satisfaction and happiness. Areas showing no change were feelings of loneliness and satisfaction with our accommodation, and also areas of deterioration in our trust in the UK were related to the government and engaging in cultural activities. And that's potentially to do with not having the time to engage in cultural activities, not having the money, or not having access. So I just thought I'd start that way because often it is difficult to quantify happiness, and those questions, as we know, aren't perfect, but just to give us a bit of a flavour of the state of happiness. And there's also a World Happiness Index, which you may or may not be familiar with. And each year the report comes out on the 20th of March, which is World Happiness Day. And very interesting timing this year. It was just when all the, well, not for all countries, but when I think Europe started to really have to take serious measures around the coronavirus pandemic. But the research is done slightly before that. So Finland has topped the list for the third year running, followed by Denmark, Switzerland and Iceland for 2020. And I have to say Norway, Denmark, Switzerland and Iceland seem to swap places for second, third, fourth and fifth. And the UK came 13th place out of 156 countries. That was up from 15th in 2019 and up from 19th place in 2018. And if you're interested, there's the link to the report. Have a look. You can look at back issues. You can look at the questions they've used. You can look at the methodology of how they surveyed people. And the idea of measuring happiness actually comes from the Asian kingdom of Bhutan and their former king, Jigme Singye Wanchok, who first proposed a gross national happiness index as opposed to simply measuring things on financial incomes like GDP. So what is positive psychology then? Well, it's essentially the scientific study of the strengths that enable individuals and communities to thrive, not just survive from day to day. And the field is founded on the belief that people want to lead meaningful and fulfilling lives to cultivate what is best within themselves and to enhance their experience of love, work, and play. And this is the definition from the Positive Psychology Centre at Penn State University, where Professor Martin Seligman, one of the key people, is based, and this is where the Positive Psychology Research Centre is based as well. And there are three pillars around positive psychology. And I've put this photo of the smiling, sort of yellow classic faces. And I can tell you now that Professor Martin Seligman would not be happy because he talks about positive psychology is not simply about slapping a smile on your face. I've also been reading things this week around the toxicity of this constant positivity. Just smile, just get through it, and it'll all be fine. And actually, that's not what positive psychology is. It's about positive experiences, positive individual traits, and positive institutions, which I'm going to go on to explain further. But I would say this talk from 2004, it's a TED talk by Professor Martin Seligman, is really interesting, and it's early on, so of course that is quite an old talk now, but it does give you a context of where psychology was in 2004 and how it's developed and come on now in 2020. So the three pillars, firstly, positive experiences. That entails the study of contentment with the past, happiness in the present, and hope for the future. Positive individual traits. This is about the study of strengths. It's also about saying that one person isn't better than another, but who might have innate strengths in certain areas, but actually how you can cultivate them. So things like capacity for love and work, courage, compassion, resilience, creativity, curiosity, integrity, self-knowledge, moderation, self-control, and wisdom. And finally, positive institutions, the study of the strengths that foster better communities such as justice, responsibility, civility, parenting, nurturing, nurturance, work ethic, leadership, teamwork, purpose, and tolerance, which is interesting actually with the third one because systems have to play a part in order for us to all have a chance at maximizing our happiness potential. And a number of those things really ring true from what I know or what I've read about Finland. So the things around responsibility, the way their schooling's different, parenting, opportunities, the trialing of the universal basic income. And that could have a lot to do with how and why they've topped the list. And I also wanted to mention culture and positive psychology. And this is my own take on it, really, because each culture will have a different perspective on being positive, happiness, and contentment. And I think we've seen culture play a really big role in how different places have dealt with and worked with citizens or commanded citizens to do things in a certain way depending on the culture. So the first area is individualism versus connectedness. Often we think about collectivism. I mean, every culture will have collectivism in some forms or connectedness, but certain countries, collectivism and connectedness is very, very important. And two examples that spring to mind at the moment will be China and South Korea. Now, clearly they're different political regimes to the UK, but the thing to say is that it is very intrinsic in Southeast Asian culture to be collectivist, to have a shared understanding of each other. So if you're told to do something for the benefit, it's almost like a consequentialism, that this is your contribution that you will be making. People will stay at home and make that contribution because the sum is bigger than the individual. Whereas in Western cultures, individualism is much more of the focus. So what can I as an individual do? Or if I do something, will it really make a difference? There isn't that necessarily that collective understanding. But collectivism and being human is very much to be part of sort of a pack animal mentality, actually. So that can really have an impact on how we view being positive or happy or being contented. Do we think that the individual is the most important, or the sum of the whole of all the parts? There are also varying perspectives on happiness. In many cultures, it's not really seen, the aim isn't to be happy all the time. The aim isn't to sort of reach out and find that, what I call a kind of hedonism seeking, but that it's okay to be sad, or happiness isn't necessarily the goal, and actually the goal is about supporting your family, and you might not be very happy doing it all the time. So there are also those perspectives on it, and it does link into individualism and connectedness, because there's a sense of, well, I might not be happy, but if the rest of my family are happy, I can live with it, as opposed to I'm not happy, I'm going to extricate myself from the situation. There's also a perspective around balancing sorrow and joy, and that it's okay to feel sorrow, and that when we have sorrow, there's certain moments and things that we can learn from it. Whereas in other cultures, joy is the goal. I think particularly we see this in Western self-help books, where there's a lot of discussion about joy, finding happiness, don't be unhappy, and moving away from moments of sadness and pain, but actually they're just part of life. And the fourth area is spirituality, and this will mean different things to different people, and I mean spirituality in its broadest way. I don't just mean established religions, but however someone will deem spirituality, and how that will have an impact on your positive psychology in terms of how you experience the past, present and future. This will have a very big part to play, and also the types of spirituality you choose to follow. And this, of course, is also culture dependent, and equally how different cultures will interpret that spirituality, which in turn can influence how they interpret happiness, contentment, joy, sadness, and sorrow. So I thought it was helpful to also put that in there, because clearly the positive psychology study has originated in the US. So think about where you are, and over the past 9-10 weeks, we've had incredible challenges, some people more than others. But one thing I would say is maybe to think about where you are in a day, when you wake up in the morning or after you've had your breakfast, and where you are towards the end of the day. And unhappy and happy will mean different things to different people, and make a note of it. And there are also, I'd like to just point out here, a number of surveys that you can take via the Penn State website. So authentichappiness.sas.upenn.edu, and there's some on wellbeing, there's some on daily happiness, a whole plethora of things. So if you'd like to know how you benchmark and where you are, I would say absolutely have a look at that link. So how can we create more happiness then? And this is the PERMA model by Professor Martin Seligman, and this is really one of the other elements of positive psychology. And it links quite closely to the 5 ways of well-being, which many of you might have seen or heard of in the UK. And it was developed by the New Economics Foundation. And there is quite a lot of overlap, as you'll see as I talk through this. But with the 5 ways of well-being, we've got connecting, so that links to having authentic connections. We've got keep active, so that's links to positive emotions and feeling good, because keeping active enables us to manage our anxiety and our low moods much more effectively. And that doesn't mean running marathons, but any kind of way that you enjoy keeping active. We've got taking notice, and that links to engagement and finding flow, and that's effectively mindfulness. We've got learning, and that links to achievement or sense of accomplishment, so we need to keep learning. And then we've got giving back, giving our time, our words, or our presence, with the 5 ways of well-being, and that links to meaningful or purposeful existence. So let's go into these in more detail. So first of all, positive emotions, feeling good, and I've got my balloons there again with my smiley face. So taking a positive perspective in the face of adversity regarding the past, the present, and the future. Now, that's not to say we have to be happy about horrible or negative things that may have happened to us or those around us, but it's about thinking about our resilience. And when I use the word resilience, what do I mean? How I like to think of it is that we all have an internal rubber band that's a particular shape for us in order for us to be optimum. And when we experience change or difficult circumstances, that rubber band changes shape and it moves out of kilter. And we will need strategies in place that we can use to move that rubber band back into the shape that works for us, so that we can be our optimum and keep going. And that's absolutely what it's about. So how can we think about setbacks we've experienced, the learning we've experienced, and use them for the present moment? It's important to distinguish between pleasure and contentment. So as I've put here, pleasure can be fleeting and immediate. So when we go to a really brilliant party, or when we have a fantastic holiday and then we have to come back down to earth with a bump because we've back to quote unquote reality. So pleasure can be fleeting, it can also be immediate, but contentment is that deeper level of satisfaction. And it's those moments where we might come home, put our bag down, make a cup of tea. If we've got some outdoor space, sit outside or sit at our table and really savor that moment and just be very content for what we have. And this does also link to mindfulness and appreciating the here and now. So not looking in the past and having regrets, and not looking to the future with anxiety, but being in the moment and valuing what we have and the contentment and the things that you might have in the here and now. The second area is engagement and finding flow. Now, I do try and say his name, but I never quite manage it. But it's from the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and that's not quite right. There's a book about finding flow, so you might find that a useful resource too. And this is theory that people are happiest when they're in a state of flow, so uninterrupted, complete absorption at an activity at hand. And I think academics can really resonate with this, that they are so into their research and the work that they do that they will often experience complete absorption. And my question to you is, have you ever sat down or stood up or gone to do an activity at 12 o'clock and you look up at the clock and it's suddenly 5 o'clock and you don't know where those hours have gone because you've been so engrossed in what you've been doing? Well, that type of engagement is flow, and it's the key to stretch intelligence skills and often emotional capabilities as well, because flow is not doing rote things that we know inside out necessarily. It will be potentially challenging, we'll be learning new things, but it's that absorption and engrossed mindset that really helps our happiness potential and our well-being. Then relationships or authentic connections. Social connections are absolutely what make us human. I mentioned the fact that we are pack animals, we need to be with other people. And people feel far happier when they're connected and they've got a community than any monetary reward. Interestingly, research has shown that if someone wins the lottery, a life-changing amount of money, after about 3 months, the novelty wears off and they will go back to the original state of mind that they had prior to winning that life-changing amount of money. And it is also linked with longevity of life, and positive relationships enable us to draw on in times of hardship like now. And I think it's been incredibly difficult because we haven't been able to see people face to face. And yes, it's brilliant we've got video call facilities, but actually that can also be very exhausting and cause burnout because we're trying to decode body language. And we also have the stop-start nature of technology, which means we don't necessarily hear people's voices with their movements, and with the added effect of being on the screen all the time, which again isn't particularly good for our eyes or our physical well-being. But how do we do that? How do we create those connections in this time? I think it's about thinking about what works for you. So if social media is another platform where you feel that you can connect to people, having phone calls, seeing people from a distance where it's safe to do so, sending cards or writing letters actually does create a lot of connection. And I think that when we transition, or as we, in the future, we go back to something that might look a bit more like normal, I hope that people will really understand and value the connection of authentic relationships. And I also want to point out that I'm not just talking about romantic love at all. It could be with your pet, it could be with your voluntary group, any family members, your friends. Really, the key is connection and love in all its different forms. And then the fifth one is meaningful, purposeful existence. So this is about the greater and higher purpose in life. What are we contributing to? What are we doing? And it's absolutely bigger than the self. It's about feeling your work and what you do has a greater impact. And I think that's why so many people adore working in higher education, because we all have a part to play in higher education, whether we're academic services or professional services, that it's a much bigger part. Life-changing research, clinical trials, inventions, bioengineering departments creating things, whatever it is, and it transcends the day-to-day politics, and it is about seeing the bigger picture. Now, it might be that you don't necessarily derive this from your day-to-day job, but you can derive this from lots of different ways. That could be volunteering, that could be supporting your family, that could be caring for younger or elder dependents. Meaningful, purposeful existence isn't just about career or what society expects from you. It's about dedicating time to others or social causes. And then achievement, sense of accomplishment. This again is not about what society sees as an achievement, a big house in the countryside, a large car, lots of money. But this is about small goals that we set ourselves, and it could even link to our flow activities that have a big impact. So it could be learning a skill, it could be grappling with a particular system or piece of technology, as many of us have had to do quite quickly. It could be learning something, it could be learning something that you've always wanted to do. It could be completing something that you've wanted to. So I had a friend who started a quilt in the 1970s and she finished it a few years ago. Her mother had passed away and she decided to get it out. She'd carried it with her, she'd moved countries, and she completed it. And it helped her with her grieving process, and it also gave her a huge sense of achievement. So anything at all. It could be tidying a drawer, it could be learning a new recipe. This is not big, doesn't have to be big things, but things that push us out of our comfort zone a bit that we can then achieve, that enhance our self-esteem and our motivation and our confidence. So what steps can you take to improve or increase your happiness potential, or be more mindful of your happiness potential? I would say one of the things is about designing a day for you. How can you design a day for you, doing the things that you enjoy? Might be a bit trickier if we're staying at home, but it's still possible. Are there TV programs that bring you joy that you could watch? Books that you're meaning to catch up on? Magazines that you've wanted to read? I'm guilty of that. I've got stacks of magazines that I'm saving up that I think I must read those. Spending time outdoors, anything at all. The second thing is to celebrate and know your strengths. We often focus on what we can't do, but what about all the things we can do? And you don't have to share this with people and broadcast it, but write down the things that you know that you're good at and that your strengths and that you enjoy doing. The third thing is a gratitude journal. How can you capture all the good things that happen in a day, even if they're really small things? And you could list up to 3 a day, and you could also, if you wanted to, add why certain things felt good or they went well. And again, Martin Seligman has spoken about this and said that if people who do this write down 3 positive things a day, what went well and why it went well, for 6 months, notice a drop in anxiety and low moods. You could also write on colourful strips of paper and put them in a jar, and at the end of the year you tip the jar out and you have lots of positive reflections for the whole year. The fourth thing is mindfulness, and I know that Imperial you have classes. Also do check your CIC, your through Occupational Health, the Employee Assistance Programme, because there's some downloadable worksheets and information there about mindfulness, so how you can do a mindfulness practice. There are also lots of free apps that you can download and have trials of, so there's Calm, there's daily meditation, anything that you think will help you. And then mood mapping, that's a bit like our checker that we did at the beginning. So how are you feeling? How happy are you feeling? But I also use an app called Dailyo, where you mood map, you put in your mood, you just click a little emoji and icon and you list the activities that you've done that day. And you can track it, you get stats over the month and also over a week to see what activities or which activities are helping your mood or hindering your mood. And that can also be really helpful to maximize your happiness potential. How can you improve key relationships? And of course, this is much easier said than done, but particularly in the workplace when we're all working virtually and we've had to do so very quickly and not necessarily had the time to transition, it might be worth having a conversation with people around how you like to work, what communication you prefer. Could a phone call be done if you've got video call burnout? And thinking about that. And also in the family zone. If you are living with other people, whether they're friends or relatives, how could you take breaks together? Maybe not just do the day to day so everything feels choresome. How could you bring some moments of joy into that day to day living? Set small goals. Well, we've talked about that with our learning. So what are the small goals that you could set yourself? And of course, be kind to yourself. This week's theme is kindness. So if you can't do it, don't berate yourself. Set another goal, set a smaller goal, try again next week. It's okay. So I'd like to ask you, what actions will you take to maximize your happiness potential? And also, who's there to help you? You don't have to go it alone. There will be people that can help. Would you like an accountability buddy? Who would you like to talk to about this? But what actions do you think will work for you to maximize your happiness potential, increase your contentment, and be mindful in the everyday? So in this session, we've looked at the happiness index and what's measured in terms of ONS and how happiness might be able to be defined. We've explored the principles of positive psychology, reflected on what your happiness potential might be, and hopefully you're going to come up with actions to maximize your happiness potential. So thank you so much for participating. I really hope you found that useful. If you'd like to find out any more information, do have a look at my website, diverseminds.co.uk. I have a weekly podcast talking about mental health and inclusion. Feel free to email me. I also have a page on Facebook and a Wellbeing 365 group, and you can find me on Twitter at Diverse Minds UK. And as part of the theme of kindness, I'm offering free 30-minute coaching calls for anyone who wants to talk about maximizing their happiness potential or their well-being. So you can book in a slot with me through my website, or if you want to email me, we can do that as well. So thank you again. I wish you all the best, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. And don't forget that you don't have to go it alone.